Alright, let's go. Good evening, everyone. This is ThatCrypto, and I'm Dennis.
Ovid.
And today we're going to talk about democracy. It's the election day, after all.
Yeah, US is trying to get who's gonna be the boss. Meantime, we are still kinda in a Bitcoin space, and mempool dropped.
Yes, as you remember last week, the mempool was full. The transaction fees were like up to 2,000 satoshis per byte.
And it's not a weekend today.
And it's not the weekend, however, mempool is getting emptier. The reason for that may be as this one. The difficulty drop, and this is the second largest drop in the history of Bitcoins. So which means that before the drop, the hashing power was lower than it should be, so the block it took longer time for blocks to be mined, and this could be one of the reasons why the mempool was
full of that.
And right now we see the difficulty drops. The blocks are being produced on time, maybe even faster, and clearly, well, that could be one of the reasons why the mempool emptied. Or maybe there is something else. There's who knows exactly. But this is what happened.
And probably indeed that might be the reason, the difficulty.
But anyways, it doesn't remove the concern that the mempool it's still full. It's still not empty. So there's still so many transactions. Yeah, 40,000 transactions in the mempool, 30. So it still doesn't solve the problem of how the global economy can run on
Bitcoin.
On Bitcoin completely.
Speaking global, let's talk as we wanted about one of the big players of global economy, about US, and let's touch their GDP, and let's take a look on a GDP structure. I guess you're gonna see something interesting there.
Yes, this is what I found yesterday, and that's an interesting chart. Starting from 1792, that's from Wikipedia, and it shows the government spending as a percent of GDP. So it started as like around probably 3%, and it was at that level up until 1862, which is the Civil War in the United States. And obviously when there is a war, the government spending goes up. That's expectable. Then after the war, the spending dropped, however not to the same level as before, so it stayed high, around 7%, and it was at that level up until the World War One. However, we know it right before the World War One. I think it was 1914 when
actually it started.
Maybe off by a year or two. The Federal Reserve was created here, and then we see the spike
when US actually joined.
Yeah, this is the World War One. Then we see the reduction. However, it stayed higher than before, so it's above 10%, probably 12. Then it goes up, and so the reason why it goes up here, because it was the Great Depression. So the government decided that we're gonna figure this out. There was one short depression before that, and the government did nothing, and the entire depression lasted for like 9 months, and then the economy recovered, and And right here, the government tried to save the economy, and the depression lasted for almost 10 years. Then we see the spike of the government spending. It's because of World War II, and it went above 50%, went down, stayed above the previous lows, and it gradually goes up and up and up. And this chart ends in 2018, and as we all know, the government spending in 2020, because of the coronavirus and all the stimulus, went off the charts. Right now the estimates is about 57%. However, we don't know what the GDP will be this year, so it might be well above that figure. So what does it actually mean that the government spending in the economy represents 60% of GDP? We are looking at the centrally planned economy, where the government...
let's have a step back for a second. Yeah. That actually means that government pays, and whoever do the business for government is getting paid, and that whoever's are half of the economy at least.
Yeah, that's correct. So the government spending is doesn't mean that the government spends it on itself.
Yes.
It provides services to the people, roads, public transit, healthcare.
So many things, yeah.
Whatever is there. However, because the government creates the demand, it doesn't necessarily represent the market forces.
Yeah.
So maybe no one needs these services, or these services at that particular price. But because government orders them, so the companies just provide for the government. And governments usually don't really care about the cost of it or effectiveness of the investment. They're not incentivized.
What if government just would like and try hard? Can we just understand that government is just one entity, and that one entity is being attacked by so many different criteria, so many different measures, and it has to handle all of that? It's literally impossible. Whereas you have multiple players, and all those huge pool dropped not on one entity, which is government, but is distributed between multiple of them. Hence, government never can be so efficient as a multiple players.
Yes, this is the complexity of the system. There are 350 million people in the United States, each making their own decisions. It's a complex system, and there are a handful of people in the government that make decisions of what those people need. And so this money comes from the people, the value of the money. Yeah, the government can print the money because they've created a Federal Reserve, and that actually gave them the tool of expanding their budget without increasing the taxes. So and people don't really feel that they're paying for the services the government provides.
They don't feel, but just they don't feel, because actually it again comes from a personal pocket. It doesn't come from out of space.
This is true. So inflation, or expanding the money supply, is the hidden tax, because if you are a saver, all the holders of the currency lose their purchasing power because the supply of that currency is increasing. However, it's not tax. You don't go in, you don't pay your taxes to the government. However, your money can buy less and less with time. This is one thing. So on one hand, it looks pretty good to people because they don't pay anything, but they kind of get services in return, but without realizing that they actually pay for this thing. And it's one thing that the government decided, okay, you're gonna have a black fridge, and maybe you want it white, but maybe it's not really important. However, the government is not incentivized to be effective, so they will buy the fridge from whoever at whatever price they decide, and they will grant this contract to someone who they like, who for like certain
for any given
favors.
reason.
I'm not saying this is how it's happening,
Yeah,
but these are the
let's face it.
incentive structures.
Yes.
So the government is not a business. They are not interested in the efficiency of their business. And when you introduce the inefficiencies in the economy, it means the costs go up and the return on those investments, the services actually go down, or they're of lower quality.
I mean, I like public transportation and I really like to use it. But hell, what's happening if I need to wait for my streetcar for 20 minutes? Hey, it's still there, it's still kind of servicing, but do I need such service?
Well, it's not only about waiting for 20 minutes. They can actually run 10 minutes, but who's gonna pay for this thing?
And I pay for that.
And the public transit can charge whatever they want, because governments pay for that. And the government gets the money from the people through taxes or through inflation. And the economy is getting less and less effective. People feel
less and less
satisfied, like poorer.
And the cycle is going over and over.
Yes, and why do we see this increase in government spending? Because of the populism. My assumptions. Because if you want to be elected, you need to promise something.
We're talking about tools for to get, let's call it, hired as the biggest servant of the country. Yes, the biggest servant comes and say, "Hey, I give you everything for free. Come and vote for me." Let's face it. Lots of people will say, "Hey, this is the good guy," and without thinking that down the road there is nothing free. Everything comes from the pocket, and that pocket is your pocket.
So we see the gradual increase. It never goes down significantly, except for the war expenditures.
Why? So if somebody comes and say, "You know what? I'm gonna take everything that you are getting for free, and you're gonna pay for that. That person won't be elected." That's interesting.
Yeah. So who's gonna vote for a president or the prime minister in Canada if they say, "You know, guys, I think that our healthcare system is ineffective. Our public transit is ineffective. We're not gonna provide these free services that you're gonna pay for it yourself." But even though it might be cheaper for you because businesses will compete to have you as a client, and eventually you will get higher quality and you pay lower price. But because you don't really pay every time you go see the doctor, it doesn't feel attractive for most of the people when those services disappear. However, when the government occupies 50-60% of the economy, this is a centralized economy, centrally planned economy, and it will only go up.
Because the next person can say only, "I'm gonna give you more," and never, as you said, never is gonna say, "I'm gonna give you less." Obviously. And
it's also the exponential increase, because when we introduce new free features for the people, the economy gets less efficient, so it's less return on investment. People work the same amount of time, let's say, but they get less, they're less satisfied, so the next person needs to promise more and more. So the solution for this thing, as promised, is more centralization, more regulation, more protection, and
in a bad way, let's call it bad protection, because they actually protect the business that shouldn't survive.
Protection from competition.
Yes.
So if there is a huge company that employs 100,000 people and it cannot
too big to fail,
profitable already. So, but it's also cannot go bankrupt and shut down because 100,000 people. It's a huge social impact. So the government just gives that money to maintain the sort of stability.
That means also that there couldn't be any new company in the same field because it can't compete with. There's a big company already established that getting free money. You will never get its place.
Yes, so this is the idea. If the Boeing is not competitive anymore, it cannot produce high quality planes at low price. And maybe some other company can, but the government can introduce certain regulation to protect the industry because Boeing employs 100,000 people. The numbers are made up.
Let's name
it's
it.
Just an
Probably people will come to and say, hey, what about Tesla, blah, blah, blah. Guys, let's face it. Sometimes some exceptions happens. Doesn't mean the exception is what's happening in general. In general, we have this.
Yeah, it's not the trend. There can be some exceptions.
Absolutely. So one or two exceptions won't change this. Won't change this number. We should understand that.
And so looking at the trend, it always goes up.
Yeah.
And it cannot go down because no one will vote for this for the government that will suggest to cut the government costs.
Absolutely.
And the services provided. So eventually it will go up, and it will end up at 100% of the entire GDP. So we will end up at the same place where the Soviet Union was. It was centrally planned economy. The difference is we just coming there through different way.
Yeah.
Instead of bloody revolution and the destruction of everything productive, here it goes slowly, where the government pays money for like sort of the UBI, and the government can do so because the government can print as much money as they want.
Here we come.
And then also when the government gives loans to the companies such as Boeing, and if the companies cannot pay it back, so the government takes the ownership of the companies in the economy. We know in Japan the Japanese central bank owns a significant stake and something like 70% of the publicly traded companies. So this is where it goes, and then when the government owns the companies,
it decides.
And the government creates the majority, 100%, 90% of GDP. This is the central economy.
Yeah.
The government tells you what to do. The government owns the means of production.
When we say tell, well, nicely tell, in a very polite way, but still it is the force. So it's not necessary to force be as a, gun in hand, right? It might go very nicely, gently and politely. But we shouldn't be blind. We should understand what's happening.
So I actually was thinking about if democracy is actually a viable structure for the society, for the country. Because if you look at this, the problem of direct democracy, it's known since ancient Greece, and the problem was if you allow direct democracy, the poor majority will always vote to take the money from the rich, successful minority and redistribute the money. But this will kill
the intent to get something.
This will kill businesses. This will discourage people who are capable of
doing something else,
effectively producing products and services in the economy, and eventually it will end up just like in the Soviet Union, where people didn't really care about what they were doing because they were getting paid anyway. It doesn't matter
what's happening in general.
Like what's your effectiveness was.
So, as we talk so long, and we mentioned that something happened somewhere over where it was, something over here when we get that Federal Reserve introduced with fiat money. What if there is no fiat money, imagination, but there is a hard money?
Yeah.
Would be possible.
Yeah, let me just give you a little bit of background. So, in the democracy, the poor majority, like it's called the tyranny of the poor majority. So there are certain steps introduced to kind of mitigate this risk. So one of them is electoral college in the United States. But however, as we see, it's still this powers or desire to take the money from the rich and redistribute among the poor is still there, and we see this.
It's obvious.
The spending goes up and up just to please the majority, so they want
45% almost.
Yeah, so to please the majority, so they vote for the candidate, and it became possible because of the fiat money, as you said, because the government doesn't have to tax people. So it's one thing to say, okay, we will provide you more free services, vote for me, and I'll give you free stuff. And another thing, I'll give you free stuff, but I also will increase your taxes to pay for this free stuff.
And you're like, what are you gonna give me? This, and this? Actually, I don't want them.
Well, because in the second scenario, you will see the cost
directly impacted to me.
Yeah, and the benefits that you might be getting. When in the first scenario, you only look at the benefits and you're, I'm not paying for that, so I'll take it anyway. So, if there is the hard money, there is the hard money standard, as we see, right, from this bump to this bump, there was a gold standard and everything stayed flat.
Even though there's a war, civil war, and so many things happen.
Obviously, when there's a war, it goes up. So if hard money or no hard money, the government will mobilize the economy. People will work for free. Or I don't know. This is explainable. However, the expenditures, the spending stayed flat, and then the fiat money era, everything goes up because it's easy and it's not really clear for people who is paying for this thing, for all the free stuff we are getting from the government.
It's not free.
So my initial thought was, well, maybe democracy will always end up in the centralized planning because the new government will try to please more and more, and they cannot cut the government services, so the only thing is to add more and more services on top of that. However, if there's hard money there, and in order for the government to increase spending, they need to collect more taxes.
That's
so maybe this wouldn't be possible at all.
At least it would be so much difficult to do.
Yeah, at some point, people would realize, well, I'm paying more than 50%, 60-70% of my
income for
those services, but maybe I want to choose the services that I want. I don't need to pay for everyone else. And they might contemplate before voting when the free services
they're free,
often for free.
Yeah, I mean, even if that service I don't need like today, right now, and it's free, I might need it in a month or in a year or in 10 years. That's so human. Yeah, we are kind of selfish. We are humans. We are kind of selfish. So we need to accept that. However, if you think about that you are getting something problem, you're gonna never use, and you pay it right now, question comes. It forces you to think.
Yeah, so, but as we discussed last week, it's really difficult, if possible at all, to feed the entire global economy in 500,000 daily transactions on Bitcoin blockchain.
So we have hard money, and let's name it hard money Bitcoin. So
yeah, so the one hard money that we had a century and a half ago was gold.
But currently it's
difficult to use. Now we have the even
hardest.
better. Yeah, it's the hardest money possible. The gold can be inflated, the Bitcoin cannot be inflated, so it's the hardest money. Let's assume that we can use it somehow. It's very difficult to feed the entire economy in 500,000 transactions. As we discussed last week, it only can support 1,000 banks globally, making one settlement transaction, well, like everyone with everyone
in between,
else. Yeah, so maybe this can be an option, obviously centralized. However, it's impossible to increase the money supply because it's all can be verified on the blockchain.
It's still a barrier for just the cheap populism that's happening right now.
Yeah, so this wouldn't be possible at all, completely. And even if there's no Bitcoin standard banking system at all, if Bitcoin is still there and all the countries in the world still continue to use fiat, Bitcoin may play a role as a check on the government. If the government goes crazy out of hand, spending lots of money, people may just shift their wealth to Bitcoin and store it there.
I mean, yeah, of course, government will try to force them not to do it, but it's forcing. People will try their best to keep their savings safe and go in a Bitcoin.
Well, it depends on what's at stake. If you're in Venezuela and the Bitcoin is the only way you can survive, it doesn't matter if you're going to prison because the alternative is death or the death of your children. So people will risk this thing. So this was a shocker for me to figure that out, that actually the freest capitalist society in the world is shifting to socialism, basically. And to realize the role of Bitcoin in this shift that Bitcoin can play. However, well, this is pretty shocking.
Again, let's just have a kind of disclaimer. We like where the whole society is safe and can survive in the best possible way. Not even survive, but develop. However, what we are trying to emphasize that the way how government do it, it's not the best and definitely not the good way. It's actually put us, people, in a less secure, less developed state. We are simply saying we are paying more and getting less.
Well, yeah, one of the arguments for this government and spending in fiat money is because, look at our civilization. This is the life standards that we have right now are the best in the entire history of humankind. However, my question is, what if we had the hard money standard? Would it be worse or better? We don't know. There's no experiment to run.
Good feeling is going to be better.
I think so too.
Right now, even if you look here, right now we have 2 global wars. Just as it started. We can say the global war forced that to happen. Or we can say that situation what happened here make these global wars possible. So I would say hard money for the whole society around the globe, my gut feeling is a better option for all of us. Like for almost 8 billion of people. That's what I'm thinking about. I might be wrong.
Well, but if you look at the first principles, the government introduces inefficiencies in the economy.
Absolutely.
It's not the businesses. There is a market tool or feature of the free market that if the business is inefficient, it just dies, goes out of business, the new business takes place, and this is how the innovation takes place, increasing the quality of life for everyone. The government cannot just die. Efficient or not, it will continue to provide. If it's not efficient, it will just print more money and will continue allocate resources somewhere where it's not the most efficient way to have there. And this is why I believe that the governments are never efficient. Sometimes they can be, like in the times of war, you need the centralization, you need to tell everyone what to do. But during
that's an exception, right?
The peaceful time, this is wrong.
Yeah. So, kind of short summary. What we have a government that taking place of businesses. Let's face it. And government can do it because it can print fiat money. So in order to at least limit that, the good solution is to use the hardest money possible around the globe, which is right now the hardest money which can be used is Bitcoin. So my advocacy is using Bitcoin might be the saver, and it might help everybody, benefit everybody on our planet. That's my thought.
And if you look at what's actually happening right now, the government introduces the stimulus, which is turning into a UBI, so they will have to print more and more money. And more. The expanding money supply creates distortions in the economy, so the market cannot really figure out the price of anything because the unit of account fluctuates, or it changes all the time, so it's very difficult to understand what is the market need at the moment. That introduces distortions and inefficiencies, and eventually that's gonna collapse spectacularly.
Yes.
Well, sometimes.
Sorry, guys, but that's the reality.
Well, sometimes maybe you can look at China and say, okay, those guys are doing great in the last 30 years, even though centralized. Yes, sometimes that can happen. When you figure out what you need to do in this particular moment, then you centralize and mobilize people without them arguing with each other what needs to be done. Then you do it, but remember the world changes
all the
constantly.
Time, yeah.
And eventually the world's going to change to the point where the old system cannot work. But because you didn't have people arguing with each other, trying to figure out what's the most efficient way, what else is out there, when the system collapses, you don't have any other alternatives. And so that can be pretty bad. So no security topics today, no tips on how to store your private key on Bitcoin. It's just my ideas and Avet's ideas on
how
the present day governance of the Western civilization and democracy, where we go. I don't really know what's the solution out of here. Then the peaceful protest against this thing is Bitcoin.
Good words. Peaceful protest. So still benefit to everybody without destruction for anybody. I guess that's a good point.
I guess we can wrap up on that positive note.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, thanks, Avet, and see you next week.
See ya.